wird Ihnen präsentiert von Audience on Demand aus dem Hause Viva-Key. Mehr auf audienceondemand.de.
Great to be back in Berlin, and great venue today. So, well done to the organisers. I wasn't involved. It's the backroom staff that did everything. So today we're talking about, this panel is the only panel in English today. But we're talking about cross-device targeting and media buying across multi-device. It's a big issue at the minute. Obviously, Neil Mohan made a big piece and did a big piece in Forbes recently talking about the mobile-first strategy is gone. It's more about a multi-device world. And we're joined today with a great panel who've got a good view of the entire industry. So before we jump into the questions, I'll just get you to introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll start with the questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gareth Davies. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Adbrain. We are a mobile and cross-device real-time audience platform, working with large global buyers such as Ciaran, the Exchange Lab, MNC Saatchi Mobile, and many more, helping them really transform their mobile businesses, but also leverage all of that rich desktop data, understand their audiences in mobile, and then provide them with the enterprise SaaS tools to buy in real time.
And I'm, that's loud. See if I can move that back a little bit. All right, I'm Jeff Green, the CEO and founder of The Trade Desk. We're what the SVP of Global Partnerships at IBM is called the only DSP. The reason he says that is because we're one of the few companies that is just focused on demand side and just focused on being technology. So we're not a black box. We're not trying to arb. We're not trying to be both sides. We are just focused on the technology. As a result, we power hundreds of agencies, ranging from Group M globally to tiny agencies around the world.
Yeah, I'm Christian Wilkens. I'm managing director of Xaxis in Germany. Xaxis was founded several years ago by Group M, so we're an audience buying platform. We basically connect data and media to deliver, as we've heard it before, advertisers with the right audiences with their target groups. I'm running the German business. We're now present. We have a presence in 32 markets globally. We're more than 800 employees, and we manage a spend of more than $800 million at the moment.
Thank you, guys. We'll start high level, and then we'll work our way into the sort of deep dive. We obviously live in a multi-screen world. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, why does cross-device matter for the marketers? And how, as a programmatic community, can we achieve that for the marketers themselves? We'll start with you.
Sure. So, I think, I won't kind of trot out the traditional mobile stats around mobile adoption, so I'll save the audience. I think we all know them. Consumers are inherently moving en masse to multiple devices. I think as an industry within digital advertising and technology, we have the habit of thinking in a silo. Technologies, as to the point of the presentation we've just seen previously, I think agencies, marketers, buyers have and still are at times challenged in pulling all of these disparate data sets together. But the audience doesn't really care, right? A consumer picks up their phone to search, to call, whether that's a smartphone, a tablet, a desktop, to browse, to buy. The consumer behavior is incredibly fluid. I can use multiple devices pretty much any time of day. So marketers need to understand this new world. We've seen large premium publishers like the Mail Online early last year talking about more than 50% of their digital audience is now mobile. So I think for premium publishers, how do they monetize this is a major challenge, and fundamentally for marketers, how do they reach those consumers? And I think traditionally there's been challenges. We've talked about mobile in a silo, but really, the world of mobile-first technology solutions or mobile only, I think we've almost been there and we've gone. We need to think mobile first, but fundamentally multi-screen, because that's how consumers engage. So for me, the biggest challenge and the opportunity is how do we tie all these data sets together? Yeah.
Jeff, programmatic, can it tie this cross-marketing dream together?
Yeah, I think it's the only hope for doing so. So it's been interesting throughout the content that we've heard already, people referring to essentially the unified stack, like we all believe in it, or that sentiment has been said several times today. 2 or 3 years ago, that wasn't the case. And in order for us to do effective marketing, we have to be using multiple devices. We have to hit customers in multiple ways. They're going to consume content in multiple places. And if you think about it, you mentioned you wanted to start high level. If you think about it from the perspective of 20 years ago, people, the primary way they would advertise is they'd do something like put up a billboard or a commercial and hope that the phone rang. And if the phone rang, it must be working. And that was attribution. That was effective advertising. And today, we can now measure everything. And we can measure the effect of everything on everything. And so the only hope that we have of helping programmatic realize its real potential is by looking across devices and making sure that we're telling a story, not just in one medium, but actually measuring everything.
I mean, I've talked to Xaxis people quite regularly, and you say we're a cross-screen, we're about cross-screen, cross-platform. Is that the case with Xaxis? How do you push that to your clients, and can programmatic deliver on the sort of those objectives?
Yes. So at the moment, we heard it before that in maybe 2, 3, 4 years we will talk in this place also about digital radio, digital out of home. At the moment, this is already reality for Xaxis in the US, for example. So we have a broad range of products in place, starting from standard display, rich media, rising stars, mobile, and for example, in the US, also digital radio. So this is already reality. And to your point, I also see the creative side of the story. So at the moment, there's an ongoing discussion between media agencies and creative agencies. But when you look at the opportunities that arise from multi-screen and cross-screen device targeting, you're really able to tell a story across the customer journey, across the sales funnel, because you know the data touch points very well. So this is a great opportunity also from the creative side, from the storytelling perspective, as well as from of course, the media investment perspective, because cross-device targeting at the end of the day will also result in a higher efficiency and reducing the wastage that we're all producing by identifying the same user across several devices. So that will disappear when we really have cross-device targeting in place.
I'm just curious, how do you join up those processes? I mean, you're a pure programmatic play, and then you've got your creative side, which is obviously, the people that come up with the ideas, the inspiration.
Yeah,
you're the execution. I mean, how do you bring those together? And in a cross-platform world, what does that mean, and how does that work?
I think that will come over time, because at the moment we need to find a compliant privacy way to deal with the data that we're collecting. The cookie will disappear. It's not in interest of Google, Microsoft, or other place in the market to have cookies. We have do not track. We have not only blocking ads, we have hijacking ads. So there are a lot of closed ecosystems in the marketplace. So the first thing will be that we find a way for the whole market to have basically one Uber ID, I would call it.
Okay. So let's just talk about the programmatic aspect. These are different devices, obviously, very disparate, as you say, very different ecosystems. I'm just wondering, how would programmatic help with the attribution problem, like who gets what in terms of the media spend effectively? And obviously, from a brand's perspective, how does cross-platform help with amplification of message? So, I mean, there's two different questions there, but let's start with you, Gareth. I mean, in terms of the attribution piece, can programmatic knit that together, or are we talking about another potential mess, effectively?
I think we've got to decouple the issue a little bit. There's a couple of things at play here. So I think fundamentally, and to your point, I think it's a very pertinent one about the importance of an ID, and maybe we'll get into this later in the panel. Fundamentally understanding that consumer in a cookieless world, it's because we're in a mobile-first world, right? So I think when we talk about multi-screen, it's about how do we understand an increasingly mobile audience. For me, mobility is transforming industries, not just mobile devices, but this whole always-on connected consumer where any device is at the hand. So some sort of an ID is important. But when it comes back to attribution, it's about understanding data. So I think the one thing that programmatic has as a benefit in the attribution piece is the ability for the buyer in real time to have more insight coming from a publisher. So if I'm a buyer plugged in through my DSP into a mobile ad exchange, and let's start with mobile because we all know the cookie world. If I'm getting data points being passed through, the open RTB bid stream is inherently richer in mobile. So I understand potentially environment through location, and again, it's critical to your point that the consumer's opted in. So as a buyer, you only want to interpret that signal if there's an explicit consumer opt-in. But there is device data, there's environmental data, location data that is new and unique if you're a traditional display desktop buyer. So I think these data signals are helpful, particularly when it comes to probabilistic methodologies to start tying clusters of devices together. So I think fundamentally the best shot we have in an open world without relying on the behemoths that are Google and Facebook.
Yeah,
and
we'll get to those guys later on. So
Sure.
we'll take some pot shots of Facebook and Google later on.
Yeah. So in short, can programmatic help? Absolutely, because done in the right way with a privacy-forward eye, buyers can now become smarter with more data being passed out of a mobile bid stream. So you need to be a mobile buyer to get this cross-device attribution, right? We need to think in a mobile-first world. I think buyers aren't there yet. Publishers still, the interesting presentation from LiveRail around publishers fearful of leakage of data was actually very small. In desktop programmatic versus their desire to maximize yield, which is logical, right? But I think the concern as well about data, there's more that needs to be done on both the buy and the sell side, but there's a greater opportunity, yes.
The current attribution model you have is a last click, last view model. I mean, does that have to change for this new multi-device world? I mean, like, the old desktop display, it was easier to use that model, but given the multi-devices we use, mobile, and the lack of a universal cookie across all of them, does it mean we have to kind of actually address the attribution models that we have at the minute and put in place a new attribution model for the new multi-device world, Jeff? How do we address that as an industry?
Well, so to go back for a second, so again, pre-digital attribution was pretty horrible, right? Best case scenario, the phone rang, you were happy, or you paid a PhD to do some analysis that you didn't really understand, and you said it worked. But that's how we did attribution pre-digital. Now in a digital era where we can measure everything and the effect of everything on anything, we've chosen last click or last view attribution. So the good news is it can't get much worse. We've chosen pretty much the simplest or the dumbest model that we possibly can. So there's lots of room for improvement. That's exciting. The bad news is, to your question, is it going to get more complicated? Is it going to be a mess? It is going to get complicated, and it is going to be a mess, particularly as we get to a world of more identifiers. Attribution or conversion is going to get more fuzzy, and we'll get more into the different IDs that are going to exist or already do exist. But as a conversion becomes more fuzzy or uncertain, so does attribution. But I liken it right now to kids' football, where they are all hovering around the ball and chasing down the field, and we're essentially only paying for goals. And so there's no incentive to be a goalie. There's no incentive to guard the backfield. Everybody's just hovering around the ball because we only give credit to last click, and it's broken.
I mean, from an agency perspective, you're the ones, who need to push this at the agency level. I mean, how are you approaching this attribution piece, and how are you trying to fix it effectively?
Yeah, as you know, for example, in Germany, we also have Quizma. Of course, this is our performance side of the business. Of course, it's most of the time around the last click when it comes to performance. But I think it opens up new opportunities for us as well, as we are able to identify all data touchpoints. And I would extend it not only through to the digital world, but also outside, because we heard it also before that when you take television, for example, TV ads, that's 45 to 46% of the overall spend in Germany goes to TV. So that's the biggest channel that we have. And if you look, Cantor did a great research recently where they identified the top 30 e-commerce advertisers in the US. Over 2012, 2013, the TV spend decreased in the US, but the top 30 e-commerce advertisers, they increased by 11% their ad spend on TV. So there is, of course, there is a connection between all the channels. So our challenge is that how would you combine the offline world with the online world, and then identify the triggers that why people are buying a specific product, or why people are going to the dealer driving a specific car for a test drive, taking it out. So it's a question of how do we integrate the offline world, and then, of course, it's how do we identify the right triggers, and then it comes to attribution.
do we have to look at different models then? What kind of models are there other than last click, last view? That's the issue. Like.
But models for whom? For the agency as an incentivizer, or as the technology vendor? I mean,
does it have to be a standardized process? I don't know. I mean, there's different players in the market. I mean, clearly someone has to take a lead on it.
Well, I think and it's a very valuable argument that Jeff made. But in digital advertising, the only industry where the guy that wins is the guy that comes last, right? And it's a little bit odd. I think fundamentally that trend has been driven pretty directly since Google brought out one of the most powerful weapons that our industry's ever seen, right, with search. So understanding consumer intent further down the funnel has helped drive spend, right? It's logical that happens. I think that going back to the point, the challenge is how do marketers, how do agencies, how do brands better understand that journey across multiple devices? It becomes a more nuanced view of a consumer behavior. And you know what? That should not just be digital devices. As TV becomes smarter, right, as multiple devices proliferate, how do we get this data together? So for me, the opportunity lies actually in a data sphere, both for technology vendors that can build smart data solutions that tie these pieces together in an open and transparent way, but also for agencies that are the bastions, the controllers, and helping, if you like, the marketer to work this out. But I think if we wait around for an industry standard to determine how you weight the algorithm between, 42 points to conversion between, day 1 and day 40, it becomes quite difficult, right? So I think fundamentally the expertise, the knowledge, and the credibility sits either with the marketer, but most likely with the agency, or someone like a Xaxis to help solve this problem.
So, sorry, Jeff.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree. And in order for us to really identify, I'm sorry, what was the question again?
It's a bit like attribution. It's a fucking mess. So
yeah,
there's multiple models and multiple answers.
Should we just rip up the playbook and just start again, right?
That's right.
Yeah, let's walk out.
I think we should. But I totally agree that we should not be waiting for the industry to come up with a standard, and instead we all have to embrace something.
So it's a subjective approach depending on who the client is. So if it's a DR client, if it's a brand client, if it's an e-commerce client,
that's
or whatever.
Right.
So.
And what we do at end state is not going to be what we should do right now. So I couldn't even weigh in possibly on what this is going to look like at end state, but I can tell you things that we can do right now, which are, right now, when you run a campaign, you should give some credit to last click and or last view. But you should also give some credit up the funnel just a little bit. Just try it. Like, if you touched a conversion at all, how much credit should you give? And then you start to have 2 or 3 goals. So you have a last click goal, you have a last view goal, and then you have if you touched it at all. That's a start. And then if you go from there to see, okay, what effect did a touch have on actually the conversion? Oh, if somebody touched a conversion, they're 60% more likely to actually convert. Or meaning if they viewed like this consumer, they're more likely to convert. If you continue to measure once again everything and measure up the funnel, then you can predict how likely it is somebody's actually going to convert.
So
what's always missing in the whole discussion is what about the advertiser? Advertisers usually don't care about the last click, the last view,
they care about
direct,
sales,
non-direct.
Right? At the end of the day,
it needs to work for them.
Can I sell more stuff, effectively?
Yeah, it's really an industry conversation that we're having, because who's paying for the advertising? The advertiser. So usually it's really one of the best sentences I've heard at DMAXCO is, I don't care about. Said by one of the biggest advertisers in Germany. He said, I don't care about the whole stuff. The whole discussion, it doesn't matter to me because it needs to work. So I think that's quite important that there's kind of a misleading conversation about last click, attribution, etc. This is quite important for us to identify who gets the money. But for the advertiser, the only thing that counts for him is that it works for him, that he's selling his products, and that he gets advantages compared to his competition.
So let's wade into a very controversial part of the discussion, which is basically ownership of data and basic IDs across multi-device. We have a situation where 2 companies seem to be controlling the narrative around multi-device targeting, i.e. Facebook and Google, who have every bit of data we have on us, basically, to kind of help targeting across multi-device. Just want to say, how bad is it for industry to to have that centralized among 2, maybe 3 big media companies. We've seen Yahoo now have demanded that people log into their emails and Yahoo accounts through a Yahoo ID. So I'm just trying to say, how bad would that be for an industry to see a centralization of the ID process, basically? We'll start with you, Gareth. Obviously, you all think it's bad, but we'll see the reasons why maybe centralization is not a good idea.
Yeah, so absolutely. You know, and I can only speak about Google's strategy, having spent a number of years there, but you know, never deep enough on the product side to be sat inside those walls with Larry and Sergey looking at single sign-on data. You know, I think across the board within the large technology players, they fundamentally have seen for a long time the demise of the cookie. You know, it's something at Adbrain we've talked about for a while, the death of the cookie and the need for a more open engagement with the industry, with consumers around how data is used in a privacy-compliant way to understand audiences. I think, you know, we basically are polarized by 2 options. We either work with a deterministic model where Facebook, Google, Yahoo increasingly, Twitter, multi-screen platforms like a Pandora or a Spotify, these kind of premium publishers, let's call them publishers, not all of them will identify solely as publishers, but these guys have single cross-device data. They understand who their consumers are, and they've got rich data, and also the capability internally to tie it together. I didn't mention Microsoft. I need to add
Obviously,
them in.
you should mention Microsoft.
Absolutely.
And Amazon maybe as well.
And Amazon, thank you. And,
and Apple.
There's a few of them, right?
There's a few.
Tesco, anyone else?
Yeah, Tesco.
So, pertinently put, I absolutely agree. There's a ton of these guys out there, right? So, but the challenge, I kind of throw this back to the buyer in the room, right? What happens in a world where, as a marketer or as an agency, my day's just getting more and more fragmented now, right? Not only do I have all of these channels, but suddenly I have to go and buy my Google audience here, right? So fantastic, they can tie my consumer in a deterministic way. Facebook, I can sync with FBX or with Facebook. I can take my own proprietary first-party data, give it to Facebook. I can give it to Google, and they can enrich it for me. Now, I don't get all of it back, right? But I can give them my data, and that can help me extend my buy. I think it's
so it just feels to me that we're getting into a more fragmented world, as opposed to a less fragmented world. Have you seen, you know, Sociomantic was bought by dunnhumby, and Yahoo's now got their own bidder, AOL's got their own bidder, and their own segments are available through these multiple DSP solutions. And it feels to me that the process is becoming more fragmented.
Well, I can tell you from a buy-side technology standpoint that, yes, it is becoming more fragmented. We don't look at it. So I probably disagree on the future of the cookie. I don't think that the cookie is going to die. But I don't think that the cookie is the future, meaning by itself, the way that it has been historically. We are living in a multi-key world, if you will, or a multi-ID world. And Google and Facebook have a massive advantage over the rest of us. The only question that, to me, that is strategic, that has any long-term impact, is what all the rest of us do with Google and Facebook in the meantime. And basically, there is a war going on between user identification. And on one side, you have a group of people, and this includes like the IAB, particularly in the US, and if you watch their feud with Mozilla at all, you essentially saw out of that come things like the cookie trust.
It wasn't really a feud, it was more like handbags.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Which is very true, but at the end of it, the cookie clearinghouse and the cookie trust and all those things were initiatives that were talked about. But what most of those do is the exact same thing that Google and Facebook are trying to do, which is centralize an ID. Essentially, people saying, hey, we recognize that IDs can be misused, so I'll be benevolent and be the center of the universe, and I'll keep track of it for everybody, and the entire ecosystem will serve off of a single domain. That has negative impacts on a whole bunch of things, including legislation or regulation, including also the ability to do ad blocking. So all you have to do is block a single domain. That's not good for anybody, including those of us that aren't Google and Facebook, because it gives them even better opportunity to tax the industry for user identification in order for us to compete. But so long as we try to federate it and distribute that power, we can talk more about what that looks like.
How do you do that? I mean, if the two companies decide that they're going to hoard all this data and say that the only way you can buy media is through our platform, how do you, as an industry, how do you kind of approach that, or how do you kind of address that?
The way that the internet works is essentially there is this quid pro quo where users essentially hand over data and information about themselves and see ads, and then they get free content. And there are millions and millions of websites that are providing this quid pro quo or this service. 2 of them are very large. They're bigger than everybody else, but they're not bigger than the sum of everybody else. And everybody else touches users just as much, and they all benefit by working together to make sure that we have user identification. So long as we do that, the industry is going to be better off than it is today, and we're going to continue to operate in a multi-key world. There is nothing, I think, that can stop that, including Google and Facebook. It's all just a matter of, in the interim and long term, are we going to try to pay taxes in order to continue to do what we all do?
So, I mean, if you say the cookie is not dead, there's a multiple approach. What are we talking about here? Are we talking about, you know, what kind of data sets are we going to be using effectively to target across? Multiple?
Yeah, if you look at a continuum, there are those that have less than a one-to-one relationship. So a cookie has a one-to-one relationship with a user, or at least
one hopes.
Yeah.
In our world, it kind of does, but in reality, it's
right.
questionable.
So it's close, as close as you're going to get to that. And then you have things like statistical IDs that are predicting essentially what users are, and that's where I think a lot of people are spending time. Most companies have to have and do have a statistical ID strategy today. And then on the other side, you get to the things that are more scary with privacy, where the ever cookie and things like that are more persistent.
The ever cookie.
The ever cookie or flash cookie?
Oh, the flash cookie.
Yeah,
right, yeah.
Where things are more persistent. Working along that continuum and figuring out where we as an industry land, what's acceptable over here, what squishiness are we going to tolerate on this side? Those are questions that we as an industry all have to decide, and we can't wait for an industry standard, to your point.
But that goes back to identification and data. I think the overlying power comes with, or the value comes from the solution that can help tie those data points together, right? So to your point, maybe the cookie isn't dead, but it's by no means the be-all and end-all of consumer identification. I suppose I'm intrigued, not to take over the panel. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
What questions do you have?
Yeah.
I think this is fascinating. Like, I mean, go ahead.
And I'm just wondering if the translators picked up the handbag reference.
So handbag is a reference to like 2 men just slapping each other rather than punching each other. This is what the Americans do. They kind of slap each other rather than punch each other. So, what do you mess, Jeff? What do you mess?
So no, I suppose my question is, because does the buyer solve this problem? Does the buyer say, I don't, as an agency group, as an advertiser, as a brand, I don't want to just buy my Google ID and sync all my data to Google or to Facebook or whomever, and I don't want to just signal out those guys, right?
Yeah, but clearly they need a strategy around this as well. I mean, WPP can't have just 2 vendors that they go for in terms of data.
I think that's the point.
What is your approach then?
Yeah, that's definitely the point. You want choice. So I don't want to go with Google. With whom else do I go? So it's not a matter of kind of a duopoly within the marketplace. I think that's not good for every one of us. Me personally, I think the cookie is a great solution because it gives the decision power to the user itself. So you're able to delete it. That's not the case if you use IDs, device IDs, statistical IDs, whatever. So, and I think from my perspective, users want also the choice and want flexibility how their data is used. So,
how do you? So, I mean, that goes into a different sort of realm at all, where users are actually in charge of their own data. I mean, Doc Searles wrote this book called The Intention Economy, which effectively says that all users should be in charge of their own intent data, like an RFP process of the internet. I mean, how realistic is a process that? I mean,
it's not.
It's not.
But the problem is that the price of data that you're getting, right? So at the moment, the way I think as an industry, we've yet to fully realize the value, particularly of third-party data that's often assumptive. I think that
it often doesn't work.
Well, that's the challenge, right? Does it work? Doesn't it work? It's subjective, arguably. Some marketers find significant uplift, others don't, right? So, fundamentally, the challenge goes back to what is the value of data, first-party opt-in, on the assumption that if, as a consumer, I set my privacy and permissions, right? So I log in with a service and I say, I'm interested in this and not interested in that. I'm, more interested and receptive to a Mercedes ad than a BMW ad and so forth. What's that going to monetize? I think
content. If you're a publisher, and there's certain content you would plug into that, and advertisers would pay more money because you are showing intent.
Sure, but to your point around the consumers taking control, I fundamentally believe the consumer should take control, right? If I'm giving away my data, I'm already doing it knowingly in a value exchange on the internet because I'm getting free content, right? Now, not every consumer maybe understands the inner workings of the industry, but there's some basic understanding of the freemium model and the free piece, right? But I think the challenge is, if I were to actually go in as a consumer and say, here's everything I'm interested in, and by the way, here's my credit score and everything else, what am I going to get in return? If I get $2 a month coupon, right, it's probably not worth me selling my data. Maybe if I get a free Netflix subscription, I'm going to do it, right?
Free subscription, the FT or Guardian, subscription service, or
very possibly. So, I think if and it's the inflection point between how much data and what am I getting in return, right? So I think I'm bullish on that long term. I think it might take us a while to get there, but there's an opportunity for monetization, and the consumer should fundamentally be in control, right? I think it should be a consumer-led proposition rather than us trying to
forced upon them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jeff, you don't believe you're not impressed at that.
No,
people are fundamentally.
I think it's
stupid.
a great ideal. I think it's a great thing to say, and I do think that you'll hear a lot of B2C companies start to share that message as we progress the industry, where they'll say to consumers, "You have total control over your data. Or, you can control what ads get shown to you." But the truth of the matter is, when you signed up for free service on Facebook or whatever, you gave them your data so that they can figure out what to do. Now, we as an industry have done a relatively horrible job of listening to consumers. I mean, all of us have been haunted by retargeting ads where we just say, "I'll buy it again if you'll just leave me alone." Those sorts of problems.
Yeah, but you'll probably see the ad after you buy it because the idiots don't frequency cap.
Those sorts of problems we have to fix, and one of the ways to fix them is by engaging better with consumers. But so the place where I disagree isn't, should we engage with consumers? Of course, we as an industry should. Should they lead the process? Should we start by them handing over all of their data or controlling what ads they see? And I just don't think the world will ever work that way.
Yeah.
But they've led with Google and Facebook, to your point, right? And the value exchanges, I get an incredible solution with Google across Maps.
That's right. I connect my high school girlfriend, and you show me.
I get to stalk my girlfriend on Facebook, or my ex-girlfriend on Facebook, or whatever. It's a great service, you know what I mean? So
so maybe the point previously about this duopoly and the risk of data in the hands of so few is opening up some sort of control. Listen, I'm playing devil's advocate. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, right? I think we're probably a long way away, but it's an interesting discussion.
But it's also, when you look at the discussions that publishing houses are having at the moment, giving editorial content for free in reverse of being able to deliver ads, people don't buy in. So
well, that's a discussion. I mean, that's a privacy discussion. Unfortunately, it gets bogged down in the whole idea that you're dropping a piece of JavaScript on my computer, or you're identifying my location. People get a bit freaked out by that. That's the problem. I mean, it's a bigger discussion around privacy you need to have. I just want to talk about accuracy across multi-device. What kind of data sets are we looking at to make the process of actually delivering an objective for a marketer across multi-screen possible? I mean, how accurate can we be in terms of the message you see or the campaign objective achieved? Sure. I mean, what kind of data sets are we talking about specifically?
Sure. So the way I can talk about the way we approach it at Adbrain, and touching on really how the industry is looking at this. I think first of all, identification, attribution is still very nascent in our industry around cross-device. So we have the multi-screen publishers that have the deterministic data, and I don't think they're really opening it up yet. And it's only really at the beginning of even rumored trial projects with the likes of Google, DoubleClick, and others that are starting to expose these to a few buyers. So I still think it's early for everyone, even with the deterministic data that we know is there. I think in the probabilistic world, the opportunity lies in being able to take, first of all, a unique user that we have in the desktop world. So we have a cookie pool. We have do not track and other privacy-safe options for consumers. So I have my database of users that have been to my site and engaged with my products and services and so forth. The challenge is how do I map them to mobile? And to do that really is about statistical interpretation of data points. So I think the biggest challenge really is understanding that these three devices, let's take a laptop, a smartphone, and a tablet, for example, are somehow linked, right? And to do this, you need to understand environment, location, behavioral patterns. There's a lot of data and a lot of noise that needs to be filtered out, and it fundamentally needs to be a statistical model. It has to be probabilistic in order to be privacy forward. But there are, smart statistical and machine learning techniques that can be used to start to say there's a probably, pretty probable link between these devices, and you need to kind of start there, right? So I don't think there's you can say, right, 86.6% accuracy for cross-device algorithms, right? It all depends on the data that comes in and what goes out, right? So I think, in the industry, you can go from anything from 10%, right? 2%, right? It's a statistical curve up to, the late 80s, maybe 90% accuracy. It's very difficult. It all depends on the data sets you have to play with and the methodologies that are being used. So there's more learnings and education that's needed, I think.
Jeff?
Yeah, I think this is the discussion that has to happen inside of every company that's here today. Everybody here has to have at least one or two or more people in their company that understand what you're willing to do from a statistical identification standpoint, particularly in terms of probabilities. If I'm 95% sure this is a conversion, do I count it? Am I 94% sure? Do I count it? At what point do you not count that? And do you understand the methodology? Again, somebody in your company should understand the methodology, because this is the discussion that's going to go on in a world where cookies continue to decay, because we all have to have statistical ID strategies, and putting them all together and understanding the way we all do it. Because what's going to happen in the future is people are going to be arguing about whether or not a conversion actually took place. Oh, that guy's counting more conversions than me because he only counts with 80% certainty and I count with 95% certainty. How do you solve that? You have to have experts in-house, and you have to make sure you're measuring apples to apples, and that is going to get more difficult.
And it goes back to last click. You just
but that's what I was about to ask. I mean,
easier.
It seems ridiculous that you wouldn't tie it to offline sales at some stage. I mean,
bring the cookie back.
Do you think we should bring the cookie back?
No. So I actually don't think there's anything wrong with cookies. No. I think cookies were fine. They are fine. But
they don't work in a cross-device world.
Yeah, they don't work. Yeah. So, but I just mean, in and of themselves, it's not sufficient. It was always necessary, but not sufficient. But of course, with only 11% of mobile devices having cookies on them, we're a long ways from.
If you take the latest numbers in Germany, 50% of the people are blocking or deleting cookies frequently. So
50%.
Yeah.
But what hasn't been said yet here today is the fact that you have an IDFA or you have an Android ID, which are considered to be privacy-compliant IDs that are pertinent to a unique device, right? Which I think we can agree has a higher propensity to be a unique user than a desktop cookie has for, traditional behavioral patterns. Browsers are shared far more frequently on desktops. Consumers can opt out of that process. The large technology guys have adopted that. IDFA has had some, ups and downs in its history, but we have an ID. I think, historically, maybe 18 months ago in mobile, people were talking about tracking and identification in mobile alone. They weren't talking about multi-screen. They were saying, how do I understand my mobile consumer, right? And there were concerns around privacy-safe solutions, but now we have a solution in the market that is...
But who owns the ID in Android and who owns Android?
Sure. Well, that's another thing. It's not an open standard, right? But the cookie wasn't developed as an open industry standard for identification and ad targeting, right? But I suppose my point is simple. It's not who owns that data point, right? Because actually the data owner is the publisher who has the app with the SDK embedded. Okay, Apple or Google see it, but the publisher, I would say, is the owner of that data. And the publisher is first, it's incumbent upon them to get the permission to use any data they're getting from their SDK. But you have an ID that's good for a year, right? The cookie degrades rapidly. You get 30 days at best, right? So,
but then you go back to a problem when you've got fragmentation. All those publishers are going to be working with different vendors. I mean, how do you bring all that information together effectively?
Well, the publisher might work with different vendors, but they have one unique idea about their user, right? At the IDFA or the Android ID level. So I think the challenge is we have an ID that is considered to be pretty powerful now in the mobile world. It's now being passed by publishers. It's now being exposed in an open RTB environment. Government legislation. There hasn't been any complexity of late around these IDs. So you have a pretty good mobile ID that's better than a cookie, right? For argument's sake. You have a cookie, which, okay, it's by no means perfect and it hasn't gone, but for the most part it kind of works, apart from Mozilla and Microsoft kind of not liking third-party cookies too much, you have these two IDs. So again, the challenge is how do you tie them together, right? I think that still remains the challenge, and the only way to do that is to take a statistical approach, right? There is no other technological way, unless you're a first-party publisher with login data.
You still don't know who owns the phone. It could be male, could be female, could be German, could be English, could be American, could be anybody. You still sort of, you're going on sort of behavioral on websites, etc. You're not taking.
But as you are, I'd argue, in the semantic space in desktop, right? You use a Peer 39 or a Crystal Semantics to understand the environment and the language of the page. In mobile, the publisher will pass you the operating system language of the device, right? That is a data variable that's passed in an open RTB environment. So you could target a Hispanic audience in the US, knowing, for example, that their device language is Spanish, right? So these data points are available. There's another question around what the legislation is per market to use these data points, right? So I'm not necessarily advocating the use of those data points. I think first, before we get into the bottom, we should start at the top. But there is more data in mobile to better understand the consumer behavior. The challenge, again, is just tying it all together back to desktop.
But Jeff, it goes back to the old chestnut about first-party data versus third-party data. You know what I mean? It's the big behemoths eventually win the game. Is that not the case?
Oh, no, I don't think they win. So I think they have an advantage. I think they have perhaps a permanent advantage. But as long as everybody else is working together, there's so much more outside of their control. And it's not like Facebook has a user and then there's a user outside. They're all the same user.
Yeah.
So as long as you're visiting more than 2 websites every day, there's an opportunity for all of us to play on a relatively equal footing.
And in terms of what Xaxis are doing, how are you how do you look at that sort of data space? I mean, you say, is it first-party data? Are you looking at the same sort of approach that Gareth here is looking at as well?
Yeah, at the moment, of course, we're already using, or still using cookies, but of course we're preparing ourselves for the after-cookie era. Of course, statistical ID is one way, but the first thing is that you need a consistent and reliable ID to create. Then you need to link them across devices, so that's the second challenge. And then you need the data behind the statistical ID or the ID itself. So the ID itself doesn't add any value. It's just the way you're delivering and connect the different, or bridging the different devices. So you already need the data. You need to evaluate the data behind the idea. That's a challenge in the mobile world because it needs to be compliant. We won't look into phone books, for example. So there are, of course, ways to gather data within the phone, but they absolutely need to be compliant. So that's what our business is built on. So,
okay. So I mean, all this talk of cookies is making me very hungry, and I think it's time for lunch. So I want to thank the panel for an excellent discussion on cross-targeting. Thank you, gentlemen. A round of applause to the panel.